Hello, this is Tom Chambers for Pokersavvy.com. This is the third video now in the old PLO Fundamentals series. It's been on the shelf for a while. I apologize for that. I know a lot of people have been looking for it to come back. I'm going to give you a little bit of information in this first 5 minutes or so about where the series is heading, a couple of other announcements, and also talk a little bit about the book from which this series is partially derived. So this will be the first 5 or so minutes of this video, and then we'll get into the combinatorics content. First things first, the plan for the rest of the series is that I will be making videos 3, 4, and 5. Video 3 will be PLO combinatorics, video 4 will be equities, and video 5 will be on board texture, flop texture basics. And at that point, unfortunately, I'm not going to continue the series beyond that point because I'm going to be leaving Pokersavvy as of March 1st. So basically, I owe them at this point 3 more videos, and I'm going to make those 3 videos, these last 3 videos, parts 3, 4, and 5 in this series. I'm rounding it out and sort of completing it, and I'll talk to you about how I see the 5 videos that are in this series as fitting together. But then after that, starting March 1st, I'm going to be moving on. Clearly, this isn't the place for announcing those details, but I will still be making videos somewhere, and I will be also be involved in some other projects related to the book. Another website that I'm going to be starting with a partner, and we're going to be putting a lot of content out, written content that is, and trying to build some other things with that site. And also, I will be continuing to make videos somewhere. So keep an eye out for announcements throughout the rest of this month, February, and with most of those things launching around March 1st. As for the sort of the structure, the idea behind this series, I'll talk a little bit about the book that I've written. It's nearly done. It's been nearly done for quite a while, but if any of you who have purchased it are listening, my apologies again for the delays. I've released, for those who have been following, I've released the majority of the book, volumes 1 and 2 of the book, which is the first product, via ebook, the entire volume 1 and majority of volume 2 at this point. But the final volume 2 is still a little bit of a way away, and anyway, the entire product, when it is done, will be roughly 600 or 700 pages. Volume 1 is 300. Volume 2 is about 400. And Volume 1 is called Theory Foundations. It is basically focused on establishing a theoretical framework for understanding the analysis of situations. And I'll get a little bit sort of poker theory philosophical for a minute, and discuss a concept or idea of 2 approaches to poker study that appears in the introduction to my book. The empirical approach and the theoretical approach. The empirical approach is basically what you see when you study sort of from the perspective of hand histories. You post hand histories on a forum, you watch somebody make a sweat video, you have hand history reviews with a coach, that sort of thing, and you sort of review from the ground up, and try to learn tendencies, try to learn themes in terms of how different hands should be played and so on, and sort of build up a full picture of the game from that perspective. The other perspective that you can take to studying is the theoretical perspective, and you essentially sort of work from the ground up, from the sort of basic fundamentals of the game, the rules of the game, the betting structure, the frequencies of different hands being dealt, the frequencies of different flops being dealt, different hand flop combinations, what the equity relationships are, sort of get a sort of a full theoretical picture, and then sort of use that in order to build a place in which to insert all of the different individual situations that you come across, and you have context within which to make decisions. So my book and my general approach is pretty heavily theoretical, or at least leading with the theoretical side. And Volume 1 in particular is all about establishing that theoretical framework. So there are 6 chapters in it total. Chapter 1 is called Basic Combinatorics and includes a couple things that are in this video that we're about to watch, and is fairly short, and almost not quite even its own chapter. I mean, it's its own chapter, but it's much shorter and much more basic than anything else in it. Chapters 2 through 6 cover respectively board texture, a chapter called Advanced Combinatorics, which gets into a lot of the sort of the really heavy stuff that we won't even be able to get into in this video, that you can do with combinatorics in PLO. Equity is chapter 4, expected value is chapter 5, game theory is chapter 6, and the progression is through basically sort of this series of tools that you can use in order to establish this theory framework. Volume 2 is called 6-max strategy, and it's 6 chapters as well. There's a workbook that goes with Volume 2, and it deals with a lot of the sort of strategic considerations, practical application of all of the data that you learn in Volume 1, applied to specifically online, mid-stakes, high-stakes 6-max games. For those who don't know, I may have said this once already, but just in case I didn't, because you hear me talking about a book, and I want to make sure that it's clear. This is the this book is in the ebook, sort of expensive ebook market. I actually am making a printed copy as well, but it costs us $2,500. It's not a book you'll find in bookstores, and it's intentionally priced to reflect the fact that it's it's advanced material, and it's targeted at the same audience that pays for private coaching, and it's sort of in line with the rates that are associated with that, the rates that I get paid for that, and that others get paid for private coaching. And whether it's worth it to you or not, obviously, is an individual question, and there are plenty of people who I wouldn't recommend spending that much money on a book, regardless of how good they think it is. Other people that I think it's a perfect idea for, and anybody who's got specific questions about whether they think I think it would be good for them, or why I might think it's valuable for them, contacting me is obviously an option. Anyway, just wanted to make that clear so that people weren't thinking that this is going to be some $20 book with all this material in it. It's just, that's not happening. That said, this series, the PLO Fundamental series, is now basically going to be a digested or a condensed version of Volume 1. The starting hints material that I put into video 2 in this series is actually comes from Volume 2 more or less, and so it's not perfectly clean this way. But the next 3 videos I'm targeting at sort of teaching people from a sort of from the introductory perspective, or as much as is possible with some of the sort of heavy math that's involved in some of it, to think about this theoretical framework, build this theoretical framework, and I'm trying to give you guys with these 5 videos a full picture of sort of what the story of my Volume 1 is. And if you want more information than that, you can go to the website PLOtheory.com, and at the bottom of the main page is a free downloadable preview. It's a PDF file, about 45 pages. The whole Volume 1 is about 300 pages, so this is 10-15% of the material selected in order to sort of take a couple key things from each chapter, and it will be, especially some of the combinatorics material that's in there, will be more detailed than what you can get in this video, just because to do a 10 or 12 slide video and spend 45 minutes to an hour talking about it is just not possible to cover all the stuff that I have covered in a 75 page chapter on combinatorics and so on. So somebody who wants to move on from this introductory video to more information along those lines can do so without having to pay anything else for it, because there's some material for free on the website. I think that covers everything that I need to say before getting into the material. I guess the last thing I'll say is just that part 3 of this video is pretty math intensive. For those of you who are allergic to math, you're going to want to take your time with it, and I hope that you will still want to watch it and pick up the things that are valuable from it. And I'm going to do my best to sort of translate math speak into sort of into the language that will be comfortable for people who don't like math. But there is quite a bit of it in here, and for those who are sort of already very familiar with poker math, it will probably be an easier video to follow than for those who aren't. That said, I hope it's useful for everybody. I'm going to try to sort of speak with both target audiences in mind. All right. Let's get to the basic sort of introduction to what combinatorics is. As it says here on this On this first slide, combinatorics is the branch of mathematics used to count the number of ways to choose a specified subset of a discrete set of objects, in this case a deck of cards. Discrete is just sort of discrete as compared with continuous. In other words, if you look at the real numbers from 0 to 100 or whatever, including 2.55 and all the decimals and fractions and everything, that's a continuous list of numbers. Discrete set of numbers is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a specific finite set. The technical terms are a little more complicated than that. For our purposes, that's fine. Anyway, we're looking at a 52 card deck as the main baseline deck that we want to ask questions about. And we have a general formula that allows us to basically to choose, regardless of what discrete set of objects we're talking about, and regardless of the number of the subset that we want to choose from it. This is a basic mathematical formula that lets us to know just how many total combinations of what we're asking about exist. And so for our purposes, the example that's given here, I'll talk about the formula in a second, but first I'll just say the formula tells you, as you can see here, that 52 choose 4 equals 270,725. What does that mean? That means that if I take a 52 card deck and randomly deal out 4 cards, I'm going to get 4 specific cards: King of Diamonds, Queen of Spades, Jack of Clubs, 2 of Hearts, whatever. There are a total of 270,725, or just over 250,000 ways to choose those 4 specific cards. Some of those hands are going to be effectively equivalent to each other. There's a bunch of different ways to be dealt: King, Queen, Jack, 2, Rainbow. We'll talk about how many in a few minutes. And clearly, they are all, for our purposes, effectively the same hand. Pre-flop, if you're looking at 2 different versions of double-suited King, Queen, Jack, 10, it doesn't really matter if it's hearts and diamonds or hearts and spades or whatever. Obviously, once you get to a flop and you have 2 hearts on board, then clearly it matters if you have the double-suited hand that flopped the flush draw and the one that didn't or whatever. But if you're just looking at starting hand possibilities, you can and we will narrow down these 270,000 into a smaller number of effectively distinct possibilities. That said, 270,725 is the big denominator. It's if you treat all 52 cards as different from each other, and you want to ask how many ways can I choose 4 from those 52, this is the number that you get. Anytime that you're asking questions about percentages, as far as like what frequency of hands are double suited, for example, sort of the mathematical process that gets to that answer is counting in a similar manner to what we've done here, what this formula does, counting the number of ways to have a double suited hand. Sometimes the math behind it is more complicated than just one formula, but it can be done in all these cases. And then dividing that by 270,725. Similarly, how many ways to have a double paired hand, how many ways to have a single suited unpaired hand, and so forth. All those percentages we're going to look at in a minute. But the sort of the basic framework for how this math works is that you count the number of combinations that fit whatever description you're asking about, and then you divide that by the number of combinations that are possible for the total number that are possible for the scenario that you're discussing. All right. So the formula here, for those who recognize what this formula means, I'm still going to review it. For those who have never seen this type of notation before or haven't seen it since high school, I'll try to, I guess, explain it without spending too much time on it, because it's not massively important that for the purposes of learning something from this video that that you can go and do combinatorics work yourself. And if you want to, you can certainly look it up on any number of reference sources. If you Google combinatorics, you'll see a ton of different wiki pages and etc. You can look at an old math book and see a more detailed explanation of why this formula works. But for our purposes, it's just going to tell you what it is and tell you that it works. This factorial, this exclamation point, where it says n exclamation point, it's a specific mathematical symbol it's called the factorial, and it means to multiply all the numbers up to and including whatever number is a factorial is being taken of. So 4 factorial, for example, is 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, or 24. 5 factorial is 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. which is 120. 52 factorial is, if you were to look down here, 52 times 51 times 50 times 49 times 48 all the way across, all the way down to times 1, and is a massive number. Once you get past about 10, 12, 13 factorial, the numbers get very large. They'll blow up your calculator and so forth. So anyway, very large number, and it's the number of ways. Basically, it's just the product of all of the numbers up to a particular number. N and M here are just the numbers that we designate for the combinatoric calculation. N is the size of the big set. In this case, the deck of cards, 52. M is the size of the subset that we're choosing. In this case, 4, or the starting hand, the number of cards in the starting hand. So this N choose M is the sort of general form of 52 choose 4, or 52 choose 3 if we're looking at flops, or whatever combination of a fixed set and a subset that we want to choose. So n factorial divided by n minus m factorial times m factorial. So given 52 and 4 as our n and m, you plug in and you see that 52 choose 4 equals 52 factorial in the numerator, divided by 48 times 4 factorial, 48 factorial times 4 factorial. Now, there's a step in between here, between the second expression and the third one, where I do some what is pretty standard in these situations, simplification of the fraction. And if you think about what this 52 factorial represents, you'll understand why I'm able to turn this into this shorter, into this relatively simple thing to calculate. 52 times 52 times 51 times 50 times 49 times 48, etc. with this, divided by down here as one of the pieces of the equation, 48 times 47 times 46 times 45. Everything from 48 down cancels. And the way this formula is written, it actually, this is always going to happen. You're always going to have basically whatever this n minus m number is. That part of the numerator is always going to be matched to the denominator, and it's going to be canceled out, and you're going to be left with a denominator that is, in this case, 4 factorial, whatever this one was, and then just the first few numbers of the long product that is 52 factorial, because a lot of stuff cancels out. Really large number, 48 factorial is very large, and it cancels out. The other way to think about this is you could write this as, and I probably should have even put this as a separate step, 52 factorial equals 52 times 51 times 50 times 49 times 48 factorial. And then boom, you just cancel them right off, the 48s, and you're left with this. And again, use a calculator, put it in a spreadsheet, whatever, it spits out this number, 270,725, and that's the total number of starting hand combinations. All right, so that's how you do the math, and although there will be, there are a handful of times throughout the rest of this video when this math is done and the number is given, but the actual math isn't written out, the formula isn't written out. I'll point spots out where hey, this is calculated by doing 13 choose 2 or 13 choose 3 or something like that, and you can always refer back to this, and to some extent you can make the decision to either try to figure it out step by step all the way through by yourself, follow every step of the process, or to just trust me when I give the final answer without going through the work. But all of these things come sort of at their base come from this formula, this basic combinatorics formula. Okay. Here are a handful of combinatoric calculations that are useful in poker and in PLO. What I've done here is basically created a chart that has a different number of known cards, or different number of cards in the deck, and a different number of cards chosen. The 52 row here is where you have the complete deck, no known cards, and then you're choosing either 2 cards, 3 cards, or 4 cards. If you choose 2 cards, this 1326 number is a number that may be familiar to those of you who have looked at this stuff with Hold'em, and certainly will be familiar to you with one of the main ways that it can be split up will probably be familiar to some of you. There are in Hold'em there are three different main types of starting hands combinatorically in terms of the suitedness and pairedness categories. There are paired hands, which are never suited, obviously. A pocket pair can never be suited, and every pocket pair has 6 combinations. For pocket aces, you can have, ace of clubs with each of the other 3. You can have, the ace of spades with ace of diamonds, ace of spades with ace of hearts, and then you can have the 2, I think it was diamonds and hearts were the 2 that I had left, whatever. You could list them out. People, I hope, are familiar with this idea, even if they don't have a ton of experience with combinatorics. The idea that there are 6 combos of pocket pairs, pretty important thing for you to know as a Hold'em player. There also are 16 total combinations of unpaired cards. Of them, 12 are unpaired and unsuited, and 4 are paired and unpaired and suited. So like ace king of spades comes 4 different ways. Ace king suited comes 4 different ways. Ace king of spades, ace king of hearts, ace king of diamonds, ace king of clubs. Each of these could be these small pieces can be calculated using that combinatorics formula. And I'm just going to, even though I don't have it written out here, and I realize it could have been, I guess, a little bit more sort of easier to follow if it were put on screen as well. I'll say that, for example, there are 4 choose 2 ways, which equals 6. 4 times 3 divided by 2 times 1 ways to choose a pocket pair. You have 4 different aces to choose from, and you want to know how many different ways you can choose 2 of those aces. And so that number 6 that I mentioned, that is sort of a common piece of knowledge for No Limit Hold'em players, is also sort of derived from that same formula that we looked at above. And similarly with all of the other examples that I gave. Okay, so that's the 1326. 22,100 is the number of unique flop possibilities, given that we don't know any, we just random flops. We don't know anything. I don't know my starting hand. I don't know any other cards that aren't going to be on the flop. All I know is, it's a randomly dealt flop. There are 22,100 different flop possibilities. Now, those can be reduced similarly to how we just reduced the Hold'em hands. Obviously, there are 6 different pocket aces pocket combinations, but they can effectively be treated as the same thing pre-flop. Similarly, there are a handful of different, I don't remember the exact number, but we'll see it lower, different ways to be dealt 975, for the flop to be 975 rainbow. That can be, club diamond spade, club diamond heart, etc. But those are all effectively the same. If we want to study flop texture and understand what is this board a good board to c-bet, etc., you're obviously going to be able to treat those as all effectively the same. So again, that 22,100 can be broken up into interesting subsets. It can answer questions. We can answer questions like, what percentage of flops are rainbow? What percentage of flops are suited? What percentage of flops are paired? And all of that data is in slides further down. So that's the 22,100. And we already saw the 270, 725. The rest of these going down are basically different numbers of cards in the deck, and this isn't just taking sort of a random, just randomly choosing a deck that has fewer cards in it for no reason. Some of these numbers correspond to what happens when you have certain knowledge that is standard knowledge throughout the course of a hand, depending on what perspective you're looking at. One thing that is interesting information is if we know what the flop is, how many different starting hand possibilities are there, and how do those break up? In other words, if the board is king of spades, queen of spades, jack of spades, there are a lot fewer combinations of hands with 2 spades in them than there were pre-flop. Even if we don't know our hand or an opponent's hand or anything else like that, and we just know those 3 cards on the flop, one interesting question might be, what's the chance a random hand flopped the flush? And that question has to be answered with reference to this 211876 number, the 49 choose 4 number, because the list of all of the starting hand possibilities changes as soon as we know what 3 flop cards are. If the flop is king 7-5, for example, there are now fewer combinations of pocket kings, pocket sevens, pocket fives, all available. Fewer combinations of everything that has a king or a 7 or a 5 in it. If there's 2 hearts or 2 spades on the board, there's fewer combinations of whatever that suit is. And there also are, in percentage terms, more combinations of all of the unpaired cards. In other words, and we won't get into the exact numbers on this in this video, but it's in the book. if you look at a board like Jack 10 9 4 2 or whatever, where King Queen is the nuts, and you know that you don't have any kings or queens in your hand, and you know that the board doesn't have any kings or queens on it, and an important combination, the nut straight, is King Queen. By the time you get to the river and know 9 other cards that are not a king or a queen, even though the total number of combinations that your opponent there's a total number of ways he can have king queen in absolute terms stays the same. The chance that he has it increases in percentage terms because there's a bunch of other hands that he can't have anymore. If you think about I guess one easy way to say this is that if you look at just the 2 column, like let's think about Texas Hold'em. Pre-flop, the chance that somebody has dealt king queen is 16 out of 1326. There's 16 different combinations of king queen, so it's slightly more than a 1% 1% chance. If we get to the river and know that he doesn't have, sorry, there's no king or queen on the board, and the board is Jack 10 9 something, and we have no king or queen in our hand, there's still 16 combinations for him to have, but the new denominator is only 990, and so the chance that he has king queen goes up from slightly over 1%, or that a random hand was dealt was king queen, to a bit over 1.5%. Now, there's a lot of factors that involved in this hand reading wise. Obviously, the actions that people have taken pre-flop, flop, turn affect the likelihood that they have different hands, and this is one of the things that cannot possibly be talked about in this video, but to give another little quick plug for the book, there's a lot of ways that I've looked at this and done some sort of range weighting calculations, adjustments for how likely different combinations are to be in people's pre-flop ranges and so on. Quantified this in all of the useful ways that you can imagine for trying to do range composition and so on. And I think there is a little bit of taste of that in the free preview that I mentioned. But anyway, you see how, to get back on topic, you see how even when you shift from 52 to 49 known cards, this change in the denominator is basically it's the way that it affects not only the likelihood, basically, like I said, king 7-5 flop. Of course, it's likelier that people have less likely that people have pocket kings than it was that they had it pre-flop, given that there's a king on the board. That card removal factor, the chance of flopping a set is different than the chance of having an unsetted pocket pair. And we'll look at the exact numbers later. But also reduces the sheer number of combinations, so that in percentage terms, hands that are not the nuts, hands that don't hit the board become more likely. Anyway, that's what the 211876 is, and it's one of the 2 most important card removal subsets or combinatoric calculate sets of data. 49 choose 4. The other second most interesting one, or companion to this one, is 17296. That is 48 choose 3, and this gives us that data on given a specific starting hand, what the flop possibilities are. If I know what my 4 starting hand cards are, there aren't 22,100 possible flops. There are 17,296, because there were few. And if I have king, king, queen, queen, there are fewer kings and queens that are going to come out on the flop. If I have the king of diamonds, it's never coming on the flop. Therefore, there are fewer diamonds that have lower chance slightly that a flop will include a diamond flush or diamond flush draw or whatever. All of those numbers are their denominator basis is 17,296, 48 choose 3. And so we'll look a little bit later at how some of these things break down, how often different starting hands flop different types of hands. One thing that I can pull off the top of my head is ace, ace, king, king double suited. Obviously a monster hand, and a hand that really can do 4 different, if say ace, ace, king, king, spades, and clubs, can do there's 4 different types of flops it can hit pretty hard. It can flop a set of aces or a set of kings, and this happens with frequency about 23%. It's kind of an aside, but the single paired hands, and we'll get to this again, single paired hands flop a set or a boat about 12%, double paired hands about 23%, and the reason for the 1% gap is that sometimes you flop 2 sets. But anyway, 23%, so just above 20% of the time you're going to flop a set or a boat, pretty strong hand, and another roughly 10% of the time for each suit you're going to flop an overpair, well, 2 overpairs, plus a flush draw. Some of those overlap. Obviously, you can flop tops. You can flop a set and the sight and a flush draw, and so there's a little bit of overlap there. But you end up adding up this 20%, the 12% chance you flop a set of kings, aces, 11-12% chance you flop a set of kings, 10ish% chance you flop over pair plus spades, 10ish% chance you flop over pair plus clubs, and then you put together this picture of I'm really going to hit this flop hard about 50% of the time, 40% of the time, and then you add in flops where you flop backdoor flush draw, 2 backdoor flush draws, which is another couple percent, flops where you flop, a gut shot, or flops where you flop Broadway, a specific 3-card unpaired combination, and this is sort of by understanding how this 17-296 is composed for each starting hand, that gives you a sense of what the flops, what the hand's equity distribution looks like, what its hand strength distribution looks like, and it gets into sort of helping us to break down some of the concepts talked about in video 2, the starting hand video, where we talked about the analyzing starting hands in terms of the their distribution of equity on the flop. This 17-296 is actually, that's all the flops. And if you count up how many flops it hits different hands, it hits in different ways, and you make that full list and you break it into, you've created a picture of that flop distribution data. And again, this is stuff that is done in a more complete form in the book. I just realized I'm about half hour into this video, and it's still on the second or third slide. We are going to be moving through slides a little bit quicker going forward, but just to, I guess, warn everybody, I'm not sure if you can find this out when you first click on a video, but it's going to be probably close to an hour 20 or something like that is the total video. So I guess this might be a decent breaking point if your head's spinning a little bit, to pause and think this stuff over. Maybe look at some other combinatorics info on the web in order to just make sure that you understand where we're at, and then pick it back up and watch the rest of it. In the rest of this video, I'm going to be looking at some specific numbers that that these combinatoric calculations generate. The last thing that's in bold here, in this section is 45 choose 4. Unfortunately, we can't get into this data set in this video just because it's too complex, basically, but it is covered in the book. And 45 choose 4 is the subset where you know both your starting hand and the board, and you want to know what information that gives you about your opponent's starting hand possibilities. So in other words, I flopped the flush draw. What's the chance he also flopped the flush draw? I flopped top pair. How does that affect the chance that he flopped a set? Obviously, he's got fewer combos of top set. That sort of, I flopped 2 pair. What's the chance he has? Also has 2 pair or better? That kind of thing. So there's a lot involved at that point because you're removing 7 cards from the deck, and there's a lot of different sort of interesting combinations of 7 cards you can remove. You can remove for a starting hand. There's double paired hands, single paired, and unpaired, and there's rainbow double suited, single suited versions of all those. Not that many categories. You try to take 7 cards out and categorize all of them, it becomes really long and messy, and it's something that we certainly don't have time to even really look at today. But it's still in bold there because I think it's of these once you get off the first line of the 52 card and you just look at the card removal cases, these 3 that are in bold are the most interesting. This chart actually comes directly from the book in a section that leads into to all of that. Okay. So as hinted at already, there's 3 main uses for combinatorics: starting hand combinatorics, flop texture combinatorics, and hand flop interaction combinatorics. Starting hand combinatorics is basically just the breakdown of that 270,725, the 52 choose 4, and how it splits out into different types of hands. How often are we dealt single suited hands? How often are we dealt double paired, double suited hands? How often are we dealt trips, etc.? All that kind of stuff. And we're going to look at a chart in a minute that covers the breakdown of that. Flop texture combinatorics, the same thing, looking at that 52 choose 3 data set. And then hand flop interaction combinatorics we'll look at the 49 choose 4 and the 48 choose 3, where we know a starting hand and we want to ask about a flop, or we know a flop and want to ask about a starting hand. All of these things, both sort of understanding the math behind how to calculate these percentages, which is what I've been covering over the last 20 minutes or so, and understanding sort of what data those calculations spit out is a pretty important part of making these decisions, both pre and post flop. Understanding the distributions that are involved, as I just pointed out, just knowing how that 17-296 breaks down gives us information about different hands, a particular hand's flop equity distribution, knowing, and situational equity distribution too. Like how often do I flop different things that I'm going to be able to play aggressively with this stack to pot ratio, that kind of stuff. Also, sort of in reverse, if you look at the 49 choose 4 list, the 211,000 whatever, gives us an insight into, given a particular flop, how often different hand strengths are going to be out there against us. How often is somebody going to have a set? How often is somebody going to have 2 pair? How often does somebody have a big draw? That kind of stuff. All the nuances can't necessarily be laid out today, but some of them are, and that's the that's the hand flop interaction combinatorics. So those are the 3 main ways that we can sort of use this stuff. All right, deep breath. Starting hand combinatorics. This chart here shows the frequencies with which different types of starting hands are dealt. And what we care about are both the sort of rank character and the suit character of the starting hand. I want to count all the different ways to have a 2-pair rainbow hand, a 2-pair single suited, a 2-pair double suited. And looking further down at the no pair hands, a rainbow hand or a single suited hand with 2 of one suit, that's this row, a single suited hand with 3 of one suit, or a double suited hand, etc. So I'm going to explain briefly the notation, and then what these numbers mean, and then we'll get moving. The rank list on the side is obviously pretty straightforward, I think. The suit notation, there's 2 things going on in that column. One is anytime the ranks are identical, they're surrounded by parentheses. So on quads, for example, A, B, C, D, all 4 of those cards are the same rank, so put parentheses around all of them. In most cases, it's just parentheses around the pair. So when we see one pair, parentheses A, B, parentheses, close parentheses, and then C, D, that means that we're looking at hands of the form 1 pocket pair and 2 other cards. And then the letters in the suit, 2 unpaired cards. And the letters that are under that suit column tell us the form of the suitedness of the hand. So for example, any of these that are A, B, C, D, regardless of the pairedness, those are the rainbow ones. Every letter represents a different suit, and they're all interchangeable, the suits at this point. So they're sort of listed with variables. A, B, C, D is obviously one of each suit. But if we look at like A, B, C, C, 1 pair A, B, C, C, this is the set of all. These are all of the hands that are of the form a pocket pair and then 2 side cards that are suited to each other, which is different than this other 1-paired single suited hand where it's a pocket pair with a side card that is suited to the pair and then 1 other offsuit side card. And it's different from this 1-pair single suited hand where you have all 3 of the same suit. So that's the 2 pieces of notation. If you look at ABCC, let me just say this one more time. This guy right here, you have one of the combinations here listed, Ace of Clubs, Ace of Diamonds, King of Hearts, Queen of Hearts. Another version of this would be Ace of Clubs, Ace of Diamonds, King of Spades, Queen of Spades, where it's just a different combination of 2 pocket pair, unsuited pocket pair, and then 2 cards that are suited to each other but not to the pair. There are these suits are all interchangeable. The CC notation, like that can represent whatever suit you want it to, as long as it fits this form correctly, which is that there are 2 other cards that are paired that are of a different suit. Anyway, so that's the suit notation. Here are examples of all of them for those that have trouble looking at the obviously the sort of algebraic notation that I've got there. You can also sort of figure out what's going on by looking at the example and thinking about what are other hands that fit the same pattern. And so forth. Rank combinations. This is RC. It stands for rank combination. And this is the number of ways that you can choose whatever hand fits this form. Quads, trips, 2-pair, 1-pair, or no pair. And sort of using distinct ranks for the hand. So the most obvious one is with quads. There are 13 different ways you can be dealt quads. Ace, 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 ace. King, 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 king. Queen, 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 etc. And for all of these, for this column, we're ignoring suitedness. This is just saying if you just look at the 13 rank possibilities, how many different ways can we deal whatever the given category is. For example, to get back to the combinatorics formula a little bit, and you can write this down to the side and calculate it yourself if you're really interested. This no pair 715 number comes from 13 choose 4. Basically, we take 13 different ranks, ace through 2, and we want to choose 4 distinct ranks such that we end up with an unpaired hand. And there are 13 choose 4 equals 715 different ways to do that. So if you make the list ace, king, queen, jack, ace, king, queen, 10, ace, king, queen, 9, all the way down to 5, 4, 3, 2, you would list out 715 different possibilities. Again, ignoring suits completely. Similarly, although the math is a little bit trickier with when you have the pocket pair hand, you basically have to do the same calculation separately for the aces part and for the king queen part. So this one I'll state this one and then we can move on. 13 choose 2 is the number of ways you can get a pocket pair. Just 13 is the number of ways you can get a pocket pair. 13 choose 1, I guess. And then separate from that, given that you've selected the pocket pair, you've got 12 choose 2 ways that you can choose the 2 side cards. 12 choose 2 is 66. 13 times 66 is 858. So that's the total number of ways that you can be dealt a pocket pair. Again, ignoring suits. So if you make the list ace, ace, king, king, ace, ace, king, jack, ace, ace, king, 10, etc., all the way down to, I guess it would be 2, 2, 4, 3 is the last one. That's 858. And similarly up here, the double paired ones are just 13 choose 2. You've got two different, you're choosing 2 different rank cards to be paired in each one, and there's 78, 13 choose 2. There's actually the same number of unpaired hands in Hold'em. Basically, a double paired hand in Omaha combinatorically can just be looked at as taking any unpaired hand in Hold'em and duplicating it. So you've got 78 different rank combinations going from ace, ace, king, king through 3, 3, 2, 2. So that's that column. By the way, this rank combinations column adds up to 1820. So if you have any tracking software, I think the old Poker Tracker does it this way, that lists out all of your starting hands and says like how many of your starting hands you've been dealt or whatever in this group of hands. It's out of 1820, and 1820 is all of these different rank combinations because it ignores suits when it's making that listing. Obviously, the hardest ones to get dealt are rank combinations, and are quads, and it takes a long time to get to have been dealt all of them. But it's a bit of an aside. But some people might have heard of 1820 as a number of PLO starting hands, and that's where that comes from. It's if you ignore suits and you just look at the ranks. There's 1820 different possibilities. When you incorporate suits, you have sort of the need to take any one of these rank combination examples and sort of ask the question, how many different ways can I be dealt? Given that I choose one of the rank combinations that fits into this category, how many different ways can I be dealt that group or that hand? So ace, ace, king, king, rainbow listed here. There are 6 different ways to be dealt ace, ace, king, king, rainbow. It is basically ace of clubs and ace of diamonds. Basically, once you choose the 2 cards for the first pair, the 2 suits, then the 2 suits for the second pair are determined already. So if you've got club and diamond here, then these have to be heart and spade. So it ends up being 6 total. And if you want to, you can write out which 6 there are on the side, making notes or something like that to see it. But it's not on any of these PowerPoints. But you see that there's 6 there. There's also 24 different ways to do a double paired single suited ace, ace, king, king. There's 6 different ways to do a double paired double suited. Again, in this case, once you choose these, the suit for the aces, then you're stuck with those exact same suits for the kings, which is why that there's those only 6 combinations. You could also look at this one as saying once you've chosen the suit for the aces, then there are the remaining 4 different combinations that have 1 club or 1 diamond and 1 spade or 1 heart. And there's 4 different combinations of pocket kings that are left here. So there's 6 combos of aces, 6 combos of kings, and they break down. Once you've set that the aces are going to be club and diamond, they break down. 1 of them is going to be rainbow, make the hand rainbow. 4 of them are going to make it single suited. 1 of them is going to make it double suited. I'm not going to go through this full analysis for all of these, but I just want to explain to you that sort of this is the breakdown of where these numbers are the breakdown of how many different suited variations of a particular hand there are. You multiply those together and you get the total number of combinations that fall into the given category. So this 715 different ways to be dealt no pair. Of those, 144 different variations of single suited with just 2 of the suit. Some of those suited to the ace, some to the king, some to the queen, but total 144 different variations. And you multiply those together and get what turns out to be nearly half of all hands falling into this category, unpaired, single suited, with 2 of the suit. And if you factor in the ones that have 3 or 4 of the suit, you actually do have more than half of all hands are unpaired, single suited hands. And we'll see that again in more detail in a minute. Last point on this page is distinct combinations, what that means. So I'll look at this ace, king, queen, jack double suited to make the point here. Actually, you know what? It's going to be easier with this one. No pair, ace, AAAB. This is the example of hands that are single suited that have a single sort of 3 of one suit and 1 of the other suit. So they're slightly weaker versions of single suited hands. 715 rank combinations, 48 suited combinations. This is the number of total combinations. Then this thing that says distinct combos over here. The point of that column is to cover the fact that there are there are 48 different sort of unique ways we can choose, like club, 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 diamond, club, club, diamond. I'm sorry, club, 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 spade, etc. All of the different, 3 of one suit, one of the other suit. But some of those are effectively interchangeable as far as our feeling about starting hand strength is. Up above, all the 2 paired ones, all the ace, ace, king, king double suited ones, no matter what suits you assign where, they all have about the same. They all have the same value, pre-flop at least. I mean, once you see a flop, one of them might flop a flush draw, one doesn't. But pre-flop, all the ace, ace, king, king double suited hands are the same. They're double suited to the ace. Both suits are suited to the ace. All of the single suited hands, double paired hands, are the same. They're all single suited to one, to that top card, to whatever the top pair is. There's variations in some of these other ones, and they're accounted for with different numbers of distinct combos. So with the ace, king, queen, jack, with this one down here with 3 and 1, you can have the offsuit card be either the ace, the king, the queen, and the jack, and all of those hands have slightly different character. You can make interchangeable, like you can move in clubs for diamonds and so forth and change them around, but it is a distinct thing, a different type of starting hand to have the ace and king and queen all suited to each other and then the jack offsuit, or the ace and king and jack all suited to each other and the queen offsuit. So those are 4 different distinct combinations, and it turns out each of them have 12 different variations. So we can have 12 different ways to go. These 3, ace, king, queen are one suit, and then the offsuit jack. There's 12 different ways to do that. This can be any one of the 4 suits. It can be clubs, hearts, spades, or diamonds, the ace, king, queen combo. And then once you choose that suit, then the offsuit card can be any one of 3 suits. So 4 times 3, it turns out to be 12. And then those 12 times another 4 distinct combinations give us the 48. Anyway, if you take these distinct combinations, and basically it's if you look at the single suited one up here, it's basically the 6 different ways you can be single suited are which 6 cards, which 2 card combination within this 4 card combination are suited to each other. So this ace, king, queen, jack can be single suited with ace, king is the same suit, ace, queen is the same suit, ace, jack is the same suit, king, queen, king, jack, or queen, jack, and those are all need to be accounted for differently if you're categorizing all the starting hands. If you multiply the number of distinct combos for each group by the number of rank combinations, you get this list, and it adds up to 16,432. And this 16,432 is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with, anybody who's watching this video is probably somewhat familiar with Pro Poker Tools and the hand rankings that they have. He's done, someone at Pro Poker Tools ran this starting hand algorithm and listed out, puts percentiles, top 10%, top 20% hands. He's got a methodology for it that's pretty interesting and good, I think, but the details aren't important. What is important is if you look at that list of hands, there's 16,432 hands on it, and they're with a different notation. They're basically one hand that represents each of these distinct hands listed over here. All right, let's move on. Starting hand combinatoric summary. Basically, this chart is just taking that last chart and putting it into putting it into percentage terms that we can look at and understand. About 2/3 of all hands are unpaired. Of those, about the majority are single suited, and about half of all hands, just over half of all hands, are single suited. 6% of hands are rainbow. 9%, 9.5% of unpaired hands are double suited. Similarly with paired hands, about 1/3 of all hands are paired. And the breakdown is as follows: 4% rainbow, about 23% single suited, about 4% double suited. Double paired hands are broken down as you see as well, about 1% of hands total, and most of them single suited. Very small percentage chance of getting a double suited or rainbow double paired hand. The trips and quads hands are the outliers that sort of fill out the rest of it, the last 0.9% or so. To sort of the next 5 things listed here are what I think are a handful of the most important sort of raw pieces of data you can draw from this. First of all, any specific pocket pair is going to be dealt 2.5% of the time. So aces, kings, etc. There's that particular piece of information is important for analyzing frequencies, starting hand, or sorry, people's opening range and 3-betting and 4-betting range frequencies. One of the key questions to ask about somebody's 3-betting or 4-betting range is what percentage is aces, and you need to know that 2.5% of all hands are aces in order to make that decision. If somebody's 3-betting 8, 9, 10% of the time, you start to get into territory where you can 4-bet lighter than aces because he's got not aces. 3 out of every 4 times that he's 3-betting, and 2.5% is a good baseline number for that. Any specific two-card combination, 6.4% is the most obvious use for this is on a board like Jack 10-9, as I said before. The chance that somebody was randomly dealt King Queen preflop initially is 6.4%. Given that there are 3 other cards on the board that are not a king or a queen, it moves to about 7%. And the point is that on any board that doesn't have a straight possible, the nuts is top set, and at least the chance that a random hand was dealt that preflop, ignoring the likelihood that people play certain, people are going to play pocket kings more than pocket sevens if it's, if that's top set on the board. So the likelihood of the nuts varies depending on exactly which combination it is, but it is more than twice as likely that somebody has whatever 2-card combination makes the nuts straight on a board where the nuts is a flop straight than it is that somebody makes top set. And so this has some implications for board texture reading and for the likelihood of different strong hands being out there on these different types of board textures. Material that we'll get into in video 5, and that again is covered in extensive detail in my book. Any particular suit, the 25.8% is kind of an interesting number, and it also relates to this idea that there's an average of 1.03, I think it is, suits in a starting hand. In other words, if you get dealt a hand with a suit, you have something that is basically completely average scenario. Being suited does not really give you an advantage over your opponent, and particularly when you have low suits, it's a disadvantage because on average he's going to be suited, and it's actually slightly more likely because there are a few more double suited hands than rainbow hands, and then you divide that by 4 and you get that the average number of chance of a suit is about 26%. Of those, about 4.5% are suited to the ace, so a specific suited ace. So actually about 4 times that, about 16% of all starting hands are suited to an ace. Now it's slightly less than 4 times this 4.3% number because there are some hands that are suited to 2 aces. Just like there are double suited hands, double suited aces hands obviously fall into 2 different categories: suited ace of spades and suited ace of clubs or whatever. But for the most part, you're looking at about 1/6 of all starting hands have a suited ace in them, and any particular suited ace, the chance is about 4.5%. It actually goes up on a monotone board because once there's 3 cards, once there's 3 spades on board, then there are there's a card removal thing. There are fewer, a higher percentage of the combinations that are available include the ace of spades because there are fewer spades to make them from. So when you're sitting there with the king of spades, king high flush on a monotone board, there's something like a 5% chance that a random opponent was dealt the hand that beats you. Now, what that translates into in terms of what action you should take and how often you should, put in 3 streets of action, all that kind of stuff is obviously more complex than just knowing that percentage, but it's a starting point. All right. We're going to look at flop texture stuff now, and this is the same chart as the previous one, so we won't, the similar charts. We won't have to spend time breaking down what the numbers mean and what the notation means. It's all the same. But you see this breakdown of two or three interesting things here. One is vast majority of flops are unpaired. About 17% of all flops are paired. Of the paired flops, there's two different ways to break it down. One is this rainbow suited thing. The other thing, which isn't discussed in this video, but is pretty important for understanding board texture, and we'll talk about it in the 5th video, is that half of those flops are what I'll call XXY flops, and half of them are XYY flops. An XXY flop is one where the top two cards on the board are the pair, so like King, King, 6. And the XYY flop is King, 6, 6. And the difference between those two, there's actually a really serious difference between them in terms of the equity relationships, because King, 6, 6 has one combination, or one fairly likely combination in people's ranges, the pocket pair full house, the overfull, that has any trips hand smoked, 95-5, whatever, meaning drawn to one out. And on the other hand, the Jack-Jack 6, 10-10 6 type of a board doesn't have any hand like that because the underfull is vulnerable. And so the equity relationships on these boards are very different, hand versus range, and the boards that have especially like the middle boards that have overcard possibilities, like 10-10 6, that have the paired card, the unpaired card lower than the pair, are much more active boards, in sort of quote unquote wetter boards than the 10-6-6 type boards, large part because the equity relationships between those, the hands in the top tier of hands are smoother. Anyway, it's kind of an aside with paired flops, but it's interesting, and it came to my mind as I looked at this. The other thing I want to point out is the relationship, or the relative frequency of rainbow and suited flops. There are, of the unpaired flops, which is the majority of flops, but not all, about 80% of all flops, there is a 2 to 3 ratio of rainbow to suited. In other words, about just over 30% of all flops are rainbow, just over 45% of all flops are suited, rainbow unpaired, and suited unpaired. Think about what this means for a rainbow starting hand, even a strong rainbow starting hand like Jack 10 9 8. We're going to talk a little bit later, and you can already sort of see that if there's 46-47% of all flops are unpaired suited, then there's roughly a slightly more than 10% chance of flopping a flush draw with a given suit. Because there's if I have clubs in my hand and I know that 46% of the time there's going to be a suited flop, divide that by 4, and that's the likelihood that it's got clubs. Except it's probably a little bit less likely, because it is a little bit less likely because I have some clubs in my hand that reduce the chance of clubs coming. We'll see the exact number in a minute in the hand flop interaction stuff, but. Anyway, you see that 10-11% or whatever. You think about all of the Jack 10 9 8, like the flops that Jack 10 9 8 hits hard. It's going to flop a wrap or two pair. This is, again, data that's not in the thing, but just take my word for it. It's going to flop a straight about 5% of the time. It's going to flop a wrap, 13 wrap or better, about 12% of the time. 18% of the time, 5%, 18%. And it's going to flop two pair plus an open ender. The pure connectors like Jack 10 9 8 can only flop, always flop two pair and an open ender together, another 10% of the time. So they hit about a third of flops Jack 10 9 8 does pretty hard, in sort of this two or more middle cards flops that you like with that hand. Of that, which is about 1/3 of flops, sounds great, except of those, only 2/3 of them, only 40% of them are rainbow flops. So if you have rainbow Jack 10 9 8, 60% of the flops that you quote unquote like right off the bat have a serious negative on them. In addition to that, if you have, by comparison, I guess, if you have a double suited version, not only do you really like those hands, those rainbow flops, including liking them a bit more than the rainbow Jack 10 9 8 hand does, because you have some backdoor flush draws usually. You're also going to have another half of these 46%, nearly half of the 46% of your good flops that are very strong. Instead of being a negative, it's a positive. Now there's a couple of like percentages within percentages that I'm talking about, so let me just back up and use these terms. If you have a hand like Jack 10 9 8, it is going to hit the flop just in terms of the rank combinations that hit, either flopping a straight, flopping trips, flopping a wrap, or flopping two pair plus an open ender, roughly a third of the time. And of that third of the time, 40% of those are going to be rainbow flops. 60% or 55% of those, roughly, are going to be suited flops. So 40% of 33% is something like 12% of flops that are strong rainbow flops for a rundown like that. There's another 18-20% of flops that fall into that category if you could just ignore suitedness, that are a big flop for you. But if you have a rainbow hand, it's always a negative, those suitedness flops. Half of those are sort of another full 10-ish% of all flops are monster flops when you're double suited. Obviously, you don't need all of the math to know that double suited is better than rainbow, but I wanted to make this point and sort of spend a little bit extra time on it just to emphasize how often a rainbow hand runs into this problem, because it really is a significant deficiency, and people might not realize that the majority of all flops are majority of all flops are suited, that there are significantly more suited flops than suited versions than rainbow versions of any particular flop. It's you see here, it's a 2-to-1 ratio, or 3-to-2 ratio. All right. So now we're going to talk about hand flop interaction combinatorics, and this will probably take another, I hope about 20-25 minutes. I could honestly go for well, I wrote a book about it, so you could go for several hundred pages on this stuff and the applications of the information. So I'll try to keep it as simple as possible, and focus on sort of just what the raw data is, and then maybe give a couple of examples of where this would be useful for making decisions about a given starting hand or decisions on a given flop. So again, those two main cases, 48 choose 3 and 49 choose 4, we saw that above. And here are the percentage breakdowns for first the case where we know what the hand is and we want to ask questions about the flop. So I already started to talk about this a little bit with that Jack 10 9 8 example. The only thing that was in that discussion that isn't here is discussion of the sort of a more complete discussion of the hand value things that happen, especially connectedness. Again, this is this just goes beyond the scope of what I can talk about in detail in this video. But certainly it would be sort of a further step is to break down all of the different hand flop interactions, including connectedness and how often do I flop top set versus middle set, how often do I flop top 2, how often, all that kind of stuff, and all of that data is in some of the work that I've done, just not in this video. All right, so we break down a rainbow hand here first. And rainbow hand is obviously pretty basic, and it's basically just reflects to bounce back. It just reflects the mix of unpaired flops here, more or less. The 40% of the time you're going to flop no suits. About 55% of the time you're going to flop another flush draw. In other words, it'll be suited to some other suit that you don't have. Clearly, you don't have any suits, so every time there's a suited board that falls into that category. And about 5% of the time somebody's going to flop a flush. Or a flush is going to be possible flush is going to be flopped. Now all of the data on this page covers suitedness only, so it doesn't incorporate pairedness. In other words, some of these boards are paired boards, some of these boards are unpaired boards. We're not looking at starting hand possibilities and saying like that you're going to flop a set plus a flush draw this often, or 2 pair plus a flush draw this often. That data, I've done it, but it's way too much to put into this video. So anyway, flops for single suited A, B, C hand. So here's when you have a hand that has exactly 2 of one suit. You've got about a 1% chance of flopping a flush, about a 12% chance of flopping a flush draw, and of those, about 10% are on unpaired boards. So some of the times you flop a flush draw, obviously, roughly 1/6 of the time. 1/6 of all boards are paired, so roughly 1/6 of the time that you flop a flush draw, it'll be on a paired board. The remaining 10% or so are times that you flop a flush draw. And so that's where, when I was talking earlier about or I can talk now, I guess, about a hand like, well, I used ace, ace, king, king double suited before, but let's say, I don't know, like just a single suited, ace, jack, 10, 4, or something like that, suited to the ace. One of the really important things in understanding how well that hand is going to play is to know how often you flop the nut flush draw, and roughly 10%. And there's actually sets and nut flush draws are both, or sets and flush draws are both right around 10%. So if you're trying to break down, look at a hand that look at a hand that gets most of its value from suitedness and pairedness, you can sort of easily add up chunks of 10%. And a little extra sort of tip that, again, this data isn't in the material, but if you have this in the video, but if you have the strongest connected hands, they flop a straight about 5% of the time, and a wrap about 18% of the time for the Jack 10 9 8 type hands, and then the next tier down between 10 and 15% for single gappers and so on. So there's a lot more a lot more discussion that can happen about different relative hand strengths and so on. But if you want to, as a starting point, be able to add up like how many flops am I going to hit, you can use those frequencies as a bit of a guide, and the fact that they kind of they're around round numbers. Sets just above 10%, flush draws just above 10%, straights just under 5% for the strongest hands, wraps between 10 and 20%, depending on whether you've got a single gap or not. That's some useful information. The rest of this carries out 29% of the time you're going to flop a backdoor flush draw with a single suited hand. In other words, exactly one on a board that's rainbow. About 13% of the time you're going to flop another flush draw plus a backdoor flush draw. So that's the boards where, like, I don't know, you've got two spades, a club, and a diamond, and those are the boards that's got one spade and then either two clubs, two diamonds, or two hearts. Adds up to about 13%. But 11% of the time you're going to flop a rainbow board with no of whatever A is. You're suited to spades, and you flop a rainbow board with the other three suits. Someone else is going to flop a flush draw when you don't have a backdoor flush draw about 30% of the time, and somebody else is going to flop a flush, or rather the board is going to make a flush possible with somebody else about 4% of the time. As you go through the single suited and add on extra extra cards of the suit in your hand, you obviously reduce the chance of the good things happening, increase the chance of the bad things happening, and there's the percentages laid out. I don't think I need to read through them again, other than to mention, I guess, that the chance that you flop a flush goes from 1% to all the way to 0.5%, cut in half when you've got a four of one suit in your hand. Chance of flopping a flush draw or backdoor flush draw doesn't go down quite as much, but the reason is basically that you still have the same long-term difficulty of making a flush. You can flop a flush draw 2/3 of the time rather than 2/3 as often as you do with this hand when you have this hand, but then it's harder to make the flush, and so it all turn and river, there are fewer you've got fewer outs, and so it all sort of works out to this idea that you're only going to make a flush about half as often when you have this kind of a hand as you are when you have this kind of a hand. And then double suited, basically all of the numbers double, plus there's this extra little bonus that of the 23%, 23.5%, I guess it is, percent of hands that are flush draw, at least one flush draw, that includes paired boards, so knock it down to about 20 if you just look at the unpaired boards. About a third of those give you also a backdoor flush draw, which is obviously a nice extra piece of equity. All right, so that's flop given hand suitedness. Here's flop given hand pairedness. So this is the likelihood of unpaired hands flopping, unpaired hands, paired hands, and double paired hands flopping different kinds of flops on which they, and defining their hand strength. If you have a random unpaired hand, King, Queen, Jack 10 uses the example, you're going to flop no pair about 30% of the time, just a little bit above. You're going to flop one pair about 40% of the time. You're going to flop two pair about 12% of the time. Added together, this is all of the unpaired flops. If you notice 31, 40, it adds up to roughly 82%, 83%, the same. That's the frequency with which an unpaired hand flops an unpaired board. And obviously the number that jumps out at you is half of the time, even not counting counting paired paired flops included. Half of the time you're going to flop total of all flops. Half of the flops you have when you have an unpaired hand will be an unpaired board that give you at least one pair, which should show you, similarly to how a single suit to the single suited 7 or something like that isn't worth that much because everybody has a suit on average. So flopping bottom pair isn't worth that much because everyone has a pair on average. Now clearly there are spots where someone's only got aces and you've got bottom pair and a gutter, and that's a huge hand. But just to understand that hitting flops is I guess the purpose of this is to say hitting flops is sort of to show what what the frequencies of hitting flops really are, so that you understand what the baseline is, what the what the center is, what you can expect to happen often, so that you know what's worth a lot more than the average. What's you really need to be flopping having hands that flop top pair and top two pair a lot in order to have their pairedness value really mean anything. Because even 5-4-3-2 is going to flop one pair or two pair 50% of the time. Obviously, most of those are not worth much from that component. And then you also see the the same data for paired flops. About 10% of the time they're going to flop a paired flop with no pair. About 4% of the time you're going to pair the paired card, pair the unpaired card. 2.5% of the time you flop trips, and then you're going to flop the full house, like the king, king, queen boards and so on, just under 1% of the time. So you can already sort of put together a picture for a hand like king, queen, jack, 10 of how often you hit that flop hard. You want to say, okay, two pair. The majority of your two pair hands with king, queen, jack, 10 are going to be top two. You may a handful that have an ace on the board, but when you have that, you flopped a straight. So pretty much all of your two pair hands are strong. You're also going to flop a straight a couple other times when you don't flop two pair. You're going to flop some one pair plus plus wrap type of boards. So percentage of these 40% boards are going to be really strong. But as a baseline, you start with these 12% are all top two. You're going to flop a straight, another 3%, something like that. You're going to flop one pair plus wrap. Most of your top pair plus hand, or most of your top pair hands, or a decent number of them, are going to have either backdoor outs or backdoor straight outs, or have a wrap. And then you've got your 9-8x flops and so forth. So you're starting to get a picture of what percentage of hands this hand hits. You add in the 2.5% trips in the full house, that's another 3%. And so just from the pairedness value, you're going to flop two pair or better, or a straight, 15, 20%, something like that. You're going to flop top pair, the majority of these 40%. If you have a hand like ace, king, queen, jack, actually will flop 40% of the time will flop top pair, 12% of the time will flop top two. Bunch of other times it'll flop, flop no pair, and then you can combine this with the knowledge about the suitedness. Ace, king, queen, jack, double suited. It's flopping top pair, 40% of the time, and something like 25, or almost 22, 23% of those times it's going to have a flush draw. So you're going to flop top pair plus a flush draw a little bit under 10% of the time. So you can put these pieces of data together in those ways and try to get a picture of how different starting hands flop, how often they hit flops. Similarly, unpaired flops for paired hands. One of these we already know. Common knowledge is the frequency of flopping a set is roughly 7 to 1. I always get confused about how to 1 in 8 is a chance, which I guess should be written as 7 to 1. Yeah. And you see it broken down into set plus no pair, plus one pair, and plus two pair, and this does add up to like 11%. And then there's another 1% chance of flopping a full house or quads, which brings us to 12%. 12% total. And then there's all of these other flops. Basically, any flop that's unpaired, you're either going to flop an overpair or an underpair, and then some of those times you're going to have one pair with your side cards or two pair with your side cards. So that's the breakdown. A hand like aces, ace, ace, king, queen, or something like that is going to flop an overpair 44% of the time. Pocket pair or aces plus top pair on a king queen, or king 2x, king xx or queen xx board, and king queen x overpair plus two pair 2% of the time, and then the set variations are pretty obvious as well. Shows you how frequently you have yourself blocked when you flop a set. Interesting information, I guess. And similarly, we got the same breakdown on paired flops for paired hand. The double paired hands are obviously really easy to understand. You either flop a set or you don't. Sometimes you flop two sets, and on a paired flop, you either flop a boat or you flop quads, or sometimes you flop two overpairs. Or two overpairs, two underpairs, one of each, depending on, obviously, ace, ace, 2-2 is always flopping one overpair and one underpair. All right, so that's flops given hand, and we got one more set of data to look at, and this is actually, I believe, the last slide. Yes. So this is the data in reverse. If you look at given a known flop and you want to ask questions about the starting hand, this is the frequencies that are an important point to make here before we get into these numbers is that a lot of this data is very useful for hand reading, and a lot of the sort of hand analysis work that I've done in the book and do with students includes using this type of data in order to make to draw conclusions about um, people's ranges in different scenarios. But it's really important to recognize that all of this data deals with a random starting hand. On the previous case, this was true as well. Given that I played an unpaired hand, this is the distribution of flops, given that the flop is going to be random. Now, in most cases where we're asking a question about a starting hand, that's what we need to know. We don't know, we're making a decision pre-flop, and we're partially making it based on the distribution of flops. So, wanting to know the percentages of the likelihood of different types of flops coming, assuming that the flop is going to be random, is legitimate, and basically covers everything that we need to cover. In this case, when we're looking hand given flop, once the flop hits, we've already had a set of actions that weights people's ranges in certain ways. So somebody opens to has a 20% raise percentage from some position. He opens, and then the flop comes, King Queen 2 rainbow. He's going to have a much higher chance of having a set on that flop than he is going to have on a flop that is 7-3-2 rainbow. What this data shows us is what the chance a random hand hits whatever the thing is on those flops. And there are some sort of range weighting adjustments that you have to make to account for the fact that, he's going to have pocket kings in his hand maybe, 2 to 3 times more often than he would have a random hand, because he played it pre-flop. The knowledge that he played the hand pre-flop is a weighting factor that significantly increases the likelihood that he flopped a set on that board. Similarly, in reverse, if the board is 4-3-2, there's a real low chance that anybody has a set, given that they played the hand pre-flop. This does give us information on the frequency that a random hand has these things, and then you can sort of use it along with weighting adjustments that we can't get into because this video has already gone quite long, and it's just it's very involved stuff. But I guess the point is that as you're looking at this video, I don't want you to leave this thinking Tom told me that on every flop someone has a set 4.5% of the time, because that's clearly not the case. That's the average. On the flops that are heaviest for pocket pairs, king high, queen high, king queen X, ace queen 9, those types of flops, are going to be a lot more sets. Flops that are that are lighter are 6-3-2 and so forth, going to be less sets. And I'll talk about some really rough weighting adjustments as we get through specific data to try to give you a guide to that. But the overall concept is really important, which is why I just spent this minute on it. Okay. If we have a rainbow flop and we want to know what the suitedness possibilities are, roughly 60% of all hands flop at least one backdoor flush draw, 6% flop 2 backdoor flush draws, 60% flop 1, about 30% of hands flop no flush draw, no backdoor flush draw, sorry. On a suited flop, the chance that a random hand flops a flush draw is about 20%. And recall, by the way, that the initial the chance that you have a specific suit in your hand pre-flop is about 25-26%. And we've got this breakdown between flush draw and backdoor flush draw flops. That's just under 2%. Flush draw, bare flush draw without a backdoor flush draw flop is about 20%. So total just over 20%, 21.5% or so chance of flopping a flush draw. Compared to the 26%, there's your card removal factor. The fact that if you ask me the question, what's the chance a random hand has 2 spades in it pre-flop before anything has happened? I say 26%. If there's 2 on the board, that chance gets reduced from 26 to about 21. And as you see on the next line down, if there's 3 on the board, that chance gets reduced further to about 18%. Now this is one that's I think with respect to suitedness, the monotone flops is probably the best one to to make a further point and think about hand reading. I said earlier that the average starting hand has 1.03 suits. I would say that, and this number that I'm about to give you is actually based on a range that I constructed as a generic range, 30% VPIP range, that I think pretty well represents sort of what the average range that people are playing in in single raise multi-way pots, people's average VPIP at mid stakes is in the 30-35 range. There's a multiplier where their average number of suits is actually about 1.15, 1.2, or something like that. People play double suited hands more, they play rainbow hands less, and it factors out to being a standard sort of reasonably so semi-loose 30-ish% VPIP range is going to be about 1.15 suits on average, and it's going to be about a 10% upgrade on the frequency of that and the likelihood that somebody has suits in their hand. So that 18% chance that a random hand has a flush is actually probably more like a 20% chance that a random hand that saw the flop has a flush, because they're a little bit more likely to be suited. And then in addition, you can make, which we can't get into now, you can make blocker adjustments. If I have one in my hand, the chance is slightly lower than if I have than if I have 0 in my hand. And if I have a flush myself, the chance that somebody has a better flush is a little bit less than 18%. Or somebody also has a flush is a little bit less than 18%, because I have an extra 2 of that suit accounted for. But the rough range is right around this 20% number. And so in a situation we were trying to decide whether to c-bet, whether to barrel, whether to bluff raise a monotone board, have this number in mind. Know that most likely, in a heads-up pot, the chance that the opponent has a flush is roughly 20%. In a three-way pot, the chance that one of the two has a flush is roughly 40%, and so forth. So that data can come in useful when you're thinking about what hands besides a flush is this guy going to continue with, if I raise, if I c-bet, if I double barrel, and how does that impact whether I can profitably do whatever. So anyway, so that piece of data I think is useful, and it's a way for you to think about sort of how these boards play. That roughly 1/5 of the time somebody has the big hand on this board. Another 10-ish% of the time, depending on what the exact cards are, someone might have a set, anywhere between 5-10% at the most. Boards like Ace King Queen, the set frequency is more like 12 or 15%, but that's obviously outliers. And then the rest of the time they don't have anything, and the rest of the time I don't have anything, and that's the dynamic that you guys are playing. That you and an opponent who maybe is also a thinking opponent are playing with in terms of deciding bluff frequencies and so on. All right, last thing. Hand given flop pairedness. So this gives us the frequencies on any given flop with which an opponent has with which a random hand has flop no pair, 1 pair, 2 pair, etc. I'm going to focus on the unpaired flop. Focus on sets. I think they're the place that I need to make the most the most detailed comments. You can look at the numbers obviously for the other ones and understand them, and see that it's pretty tough to flop no pair. Is I guess an interesting piece of information, but. Anyway, sets. We got 3.1%, 1.0, 0.05, 0.25, 0.002, 0.001, all adding up to roughly, this set plus pocket pair, for example, is double paired hands that flop the set on this board, whatever unpaired flop we're talking about. The rest of them should be self-explanatory. 4%, so it adds up to just about 4.4, 4.5%, something like that. There are 3 different possible sets, obviously, and so any particular set will have been dealt about 1.5% of the time. So given that the board is King, Queen, 2, and I know nothing else about a guy's hand except that it's a random pre-flop hand, there's about a 1.5% chance he has pocket kings, about a 1.5% chance he has pocket queens, about a 1.5% chance he has pocket 2s. If you recall from, let me bounce back up to it, our starting hand stuff, any specific pocket pair about 2.5% of the time. And so here's a card removal adjustment. We went from that bump up again to previous slide. We went from this world where we're looking at the 52 choose 4, the 270,000 different starting hand possibilities, into this one where we got 211,876, and we've taken away some of the combinations of a set that we could possibly, because there's boards King, Queen, 2. It's there's one king that people can't have. There's only 3 combinations of pocket kings, and then obviously lots of combinations of side cards, and the total combinations doesn't line up is exactly 50%, but it's close. But then there's a lower denominator, and so you go from a 2.5% chance of having a pocket pair, specific pocket pair preflop, to on a board that has that pocket pair, or sorry, that has that card, the chance of having it goes down to about 1.5%, and if it doesn't have it, it goes up to about 3%. And so the and I can look at this, show you this data over here, and sort of see how that works. Point being, like a board like I don't know, King Jack 2. Pre-flop, there was a king 2.5% chance a random hand had kings, 2.5% chance a random hand had aces. On the flop, that shifts to a 1.5% chance somebody has kings and about a 3% chance somebody has aces. And you can see this breakdown under the unpaired flops. We got our almost 4.5% chance of a set, and then we've got pocket pairs, 16.3%. One pair plus pocket pair, that makes it 25%. Roughly, 26-27% of the time, somebody will have a pocket pair on a flop like King Queen 10. If you sort of realize that there are 10 different pocket pairs, and you divide that, what is the total? 26. Let me see. 16, 25, 27, 28. And you've got this other board that has a set and a pocket pair. You end up getting just under. It would round up if you counted for everything exactly. It would round up to about 3% chance that somebody has a specific pocket pair hand. There's some duplication going on, particularly in here. Obviously, some of these are, all of these. This, ace ace king king is included in this 0.25, and it counts both as a case of having a set and having a pocket pair. In these terms, I apologize if this is getting a little confusing. Don't overthink this. Let me just say this: you take that 2.5% chance of having a pocket pair, and that shifts once you know what the flop is into a 1.5% chance of having a set, 3% chance of having whatever unpaired or unsetted overpair we're talking about. And in addition to that, there's this card removal, card range weighting factor that has to be taken account of. So if you look at a board like King Queen 2, where somebody who plays 25-30% of hands is actually going to play kings and queens almost 100% of the time, their chance of having a set on that board is actually 2 or 3 times greater than this 1.5%. So you're looking at, a 3.5, 4% of the guy's pre-flop range flopped a set on that board, and then on a 7-3-2 board, maybe it's more like flopped a set on a set of kings, another 3-4% flopped a set of queens, maybe another 1% or barely that flopped a set of twos. So the chance the guy's got a set on that particular board, which is really set heavy, it's like 8 or 9%. I can't get into any more examples or anything like that. This has clearly been a lot of detail anyway, and I hope that those of you who are interested in this stuff and have picked up some small things and really want to get into it further will A, check out the free material in my book, B, do some work on this on your own, sort of draw some conclusions from the data that I've given you and try to apply it to specific situations, and then C, obviously it would be great for this to help me make some book sales as well. As I said, just about everything that's presented here is relative to what's in the book is just a preliminary presentation. There's a lot more stuff there, and for those who find this approach to poker interesting, there's definitely a lot for you there. All right, that's going to wrap up what I think is the longest video I've ever made for Pokersavvy. It's almost an hour and a half. I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and will sort of feel free to, at least as long as I'm still at Pokersavvy, to ask questions about it in the thread. I'm going to try to pay attention to the threads on this on these videos as long as I still am around and posting in the forums. I guess that's it. Look forward to the equity one probably about a week after this one is released.